Stories never heard before. The weight of silence. There was once a girl named Meera, who grew up in a village where the nights were louder than the days. Not because of people, but because of silence itself. The silence pressed against the walls, seeped into the cracks, and sat heavy on her chest. Her father was a carpenter, shaping wood into doors and windows, but rarely shaping words. Her mother was a singer once, but after illness took her voice, she hummed only in fragments. Meera learned early that silence could be both shelter and prison. At 10, she began to stammer. Words broke inside her mouth, like glass. Teachers grew impatient. Classmates laughed. She stopped speaking in public. But inside, she carried entire conversations, questions, answers, and stories, like rivers dammed behind stone. One evening, while helping her father polish a chair, she noticed the grain of the wood. It looked like lines on a palm, carrying stories of storms and seasons. She whispered to herself, "Wood remembers." She began touching objects, and naming their memories. A cracked pot, you carried water longer than anyone asked. A torn book, you still hold words, even if nobody reads them. A broken kite, you once touched the sky. Her stammer didn't vanish, but her voice softened. She spoke to things, even when she couldn't speak to people. Meera's village was small, surrounded by fields that turned golden, in harvest, and silver under moonlight. Children played in the dust, shouting games, but Meera often sat apart, tracing shapes in the soil. She wasn't lonely. She was listening. Listening to the way silence bent around footsteps, how it echoed in the temple bells, how it lingered after laughter faded. Her father sometimes brought home scraps of wood. Meera would hold them, imagining the trees they once were. She thought of forests she had never seen, storms that had bent branches, birds that had perched on them. Each piece of wood felt like a diary, written without ink. Her mother, though voiceless, taught her something precious. At night, when the house was quiet, she hummed broken tunes. Meera noticed that even fragments carried beauty. A single note could hold longing, a pause could hold grief. Silence, she realized, was not empty. It was full of echoes. At 13, she discovered painting. Not landscapes, not portraits. Just colors. She painted silence as blue, pain as gray, resilience as gold. She painted on scraps of paper, on walls hidden behind cupboards, on the inside of her school notebooks. Teachers scolded her, but she kept painting. Her classmates mocked her stammer, but when they saw her notebooks, some grew curious. "Why don't you write words?" they asked. Meera only smiled. She couldn't explain that colors were her words, that each shade carried a sentence she couldn't speak. One day, a traveling artist visited the school. He saw her notebook filled with colors, instead of notes. Instead of punishment, he asked, "What do these mean?" Meera hesitated, then whispered, "They are my words." The artist nodded. "Then keep speaking." That night, she painted her first canvas, a girl with a mouthful of broken letters, standing beneath a sky of unspoken stars. She titled it, "The Weight of Silence." Her parents didn't understand, but they didn't stop her. Slowly, she began to paint for others. A boy grieving his brother received a canvas of two trees, leaning toward each other. A girl hiding bruises received a painting of a bird, with wings stitched, but still flying. She realized that her silence was not just hers, it belonged to many. People carried unspoken pain, and her colors gave them a mirror. At 15, she organized a small exhibition in the village temple courtyard. She didn't speak. She just placed her paintings on the walls. People came. They stood quietly. Some cried. Some touched the colors as if they were wounds. One old woman whispered, This is how silence heals. Meera began to realize that courage was sometimes the quiet act of showing what you carried, without giving any explanation. At 17, she moved to the city for college. She studied literature, but spent nights painting. She joined a group of students, who called themselves the Silent Voices. They met weekly, not to debate or argue, but to share what they couldn't say aloud. Some wrote, some painted, some played music. Meera listened, then painted their silences into colors. One boy said, "I feel invisible." She painted a lantern glowing in an empty street. One girl said, "I don't know how to forgive." She painted a river carrying stones downstream. Another whispered, "I want to live, but I don't know how." She painted a seed breaking open in soil. Her paintings began to travel, first to classrooms, then to galleries, then to homes of strangers. She never signed them. She said, "Silence doesn't need a name." Years passed. Meera became known, not for speeches or interviews, but for colors that carried unspoken truths. She taught children who stammered, who trembled, who hid. She told them, "Your silence is not emptiness. It is a language waiting to be heard." She painted hospitals, where patients waited in corridors, orphanages, where children stared at ceilings, shelters, where women carried invisible scars. Her canvases became companions for those who had no words. Critics tried to interpret her work, but she never explained. She believed that silence should remain open, that each viewer should find their own meaning. She lived simply, never chasing fame. Her rooms were filled with unfinished canvases, brushes worn thin, and jars of paint mixed into strange hues. She often painted late into the night, when silence was deepest, when the city's noise had finally quieted. She said those hours belonged to her, because silence was strongest then, and she could hear what others ignored. Sometimes, she would pause mid-brush stroke and simply sit with the canvas. She believed silence itself was part of the painting, that the pauses between colors mattered as much as the colors themselves. She often said, "Every silence has a rhythm. If you listen long enough, you can hear it breathing." When she turned 40, she returned to her village. The temple courtyard was still there, but the walls were bare. She brought her old canvases, faded but alive, and placed them again. Villagers gathered, just as before. Some remembered. Some were new. She stood before them, her voice still trembling, but she spoke, "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the act of carrying silence until it becomes song." The crowd was quiet. Then, slowly, they began to hum. A chorus of broken, trembling, imperfect voices filled the courtyard. Meera closed her eyes. For the first time, silence did not weigh her down. It lifted her. She had not overcome her stammer. She had not erased her pain. But she had turned silence into color, and color into courage. And when people asked what she had built, she said, "Not paintings. Not galleries. I built a place, where silence could breathe." She left behind no monument, no fame. Only canvases, scattered across homes and hearts. Each one carrying resilience, recovery, and the quiet bravery of a girl, who once whispered to broken things, who turned silence into color, and color into courage. She showed people what one could do to mend hearts. And, she also showed people, that one does not have to silently carry the weight of silence.